Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters, and debunkers. Perspective is the imaginary curve, and it's quite easy to understand how we have been deceived into believing we are on a spinning globe when we realize that the geometry for the globe Earth is the same as the human eye perspective. Textbook illustrations of how we see things on a globe always have the observer somewhere on the side of a circle, looking down so that their line of sight touches the edge of the circle, giving us the perception that we are looking down a curve. And of course, the higher we go, the further down this curve we have to look. This is simply a reversal of the human eye perspective. And this is why we have globe Earth defenders arguing with flat earthers about a perceived drop in the horizon. But the reality is, if we are on a sphere, we are always on top of that sphere and looking directly ahead. So, of course, in this kind of illustration with the observer on top of a sphere looking directly ahead, we understand that the observer will never see the surface and the sky appear to meet as the surface of the globe curves down and away from the observer in all directions. But of course, in reality, we do see the surface and the sky appear to meet at eye level, at the vanishing line of the observer's point of view or perspective. And we know from personal experience and observations throughout our lives that we see the same phenomenon when we are looking at parallel lines going off into the distance, such as train tracks which appear to converge at the vanishing line of the observer's perspective or point of view. We also see the same thing when we are looking at lampposts going off into the distance, and we see this with looking down long corridors that appear to converge in the center of the observer's field of view. But at the same time, if we took a side-on view of what the observer is looking at, we know that the surface and the sky, or the floor and the ceiling in the corridor, never actually converge. Another ridiculous aspect of the belief that we are living on a ball is to perceive that this ball has a top and a bottom, whereas in reality we know that a sphere does not have a top or a bottom. It has only one continuous edge. And we are repeatedly told that the so-called top of the globe is tilted at an angle of somewhere between 23.5 and 24 degrees. But this is simply another reversal of perspective to have us imagine or perceive axial tilt or curvature by taking the geometry of perspective and applying it to the imaginary curve of the globe Earth. In the field of photography, it is commonly known that the 50mm lens is the closest to the human eye and gives us images that represent what we usually see. Again, we have to keep in mind that we are comparing what the observer sees from his or her eyes and how that can be perceived from a third person's perspective, looking side on at what the observer is looking at, or their field of view. And it is that field of view that has the same angles of geometry that are used to describe living on a spinning ball Earth. So basically we have two things going on in any observer's field of view, or that of a camera lens, with both the human eye and the camera lens using convex lenses. First, we have this expanding field of view over distance, And then we have the narrowing of that field of view with perspective, causing the surface and the sky to appear to meet in the distance as far as our eyes can see. And that line or point of convergence is always at the observer's eye level. It has nothing to do with any alleged curvature. This is simply the way we see everything. And the point in the center of any observer's field of view where everything appears to converge, like the parallel train lines appearing to converge in the distance, or the surface and the sky appearing to meet, or the end of the corridor, is down to the focal length of the human eye. And the 50mm lens for cameras has about the same focal length as a human eye and the same angles of the field of view. Charts and illustrations giving us the focal length and the angles of field of view for various lenses usually give us a figure of between 45 and 47 degrees for the angle of the field of view for a 50mm lens, depending on the source. So that means that the angle at which the field of view is expanding from the lens is an angle of about 45 degrees, split down the middle at eye level, the center of the lens or the eye. So if we take that 47 degrees and split it down the middle or divide it in two, we end up with 23.5 degrees, the very same angle as the alleged tilt of the globe Earth. And this is why the globe-Earth deception requires two north poles and two equators, with a difference between them of 23.5 degrees, or axial tilt. We are told there is a north pole at which all compasses point, as well as a geodetic, or true north, as they say, which is the alleged axis of rotation as the Earth spins to create night and day. And we are told there is an ecliptic equator, which is parallel to the direction of the globe Earth's orbit around the Sun, as well as a celestial equator. So when looking at the stars, the horizon is the celestial equator, which is actually the observer's eye level. And again, the difference between the ecliptic and the celestial equators is 23.5 degrees. We can also see here why a sphere or circle was desired by the mathematicians to create the globe deception, ignoring perspective or replacing it with an imaginary curve. Nobody ever discovered that the Earth is a globe. It is just that mathematicians discovered a way to describe the Earth as being a globe by ignoring or replacing perspective. A circle of 360 degrees can be divided into four parts of 90 degrees each, with the poles and the equators between them. A wide-angle lens of about 25 millimeters will give you a field of view with an angle of 90 degrees. So, of course, when we do this, we get a distorted or bent horizon. But halve that 90 degrees and we get 45 degrees, which is about the same angle of the field of view that we see with the human eye, or a 50mm lens. So this is why all the so-called proofs that we are living on a globe use observations of the sky rather than actually measuring any physical curvature or geographical curvature on the surface of the Earth. Those observations which are governed by perspective were flipped and we were given a side-on or God view of the observer on a ball Earth, ignoring and replacing perspective with an imaginary curve. And when it comes to explaining how the seasons work on the flat Earth, as opposed to axial tilt being responsible for seasons on the globe Earth as it orbits the Sun. Zetetic astronomy tells us that the Sun is making a corkscrew or spiraling motion throughout the year, being at its highest point, circling above the Tropic of Cancer on June the 21st, summertime in the north, then being at its lowest elevation and doing a wider circle above the Tropic of Capricorn in the winter, in December. So for observers watching the Sun on the flat Earth throughout the year, the difference between the height of the Sun or angle of elevation between these two times is 23.5 degrees. While the mechanics of how this all works still remains a mystery to us mere humans on this intelligently designed Earth, this actually makes a lot more sense than the notion that the spinning ball Earth is orbiting the Sun in an elliptical orbit, which actually puts the Earth farther away from the Sun during the summer and closer to the Sun during winter. So if you are new to this topic, hopefully this brings you to the understanding that everything we think we know about the heliocentric model is simply an interpretation of what we see in the sky, and that the geometry used to have us imagine curvature on the flat Earth is simply an interpretation of perspective. Perspective is the imaginary curve. Thank you very much.